Hello and welcome to another episode of Autistics Unscripted. Even though we are no longer strictly just talking to autistics, we are more broadly having conversations with other neurodivergent folks, especially folks who are late realized or still in the exploration process. I am excited to have Karyn Claflin here today, and they are a word wrangler and a copywriter that we met through a copywriting course and I guess like anti-oppression marketing ecosystem space. So that's how we got connected and just kind of started having conversations from there. So welcome, Karyn. How are you
Hi,
doing
Jen.
today?
I'm pretty good. I'm just like gonna name this that I am a little nervous because I have anxiety around public speaking. So I just like feel a little more comfortable showing up here if I like name that. So I'm
I love
nervous,
that.
but I am excited to be here.
I love that. I'm feeling a little nervous too because it's been a minute since I've recorded an episode, so I'm like getting back into it. So yeah, I'm glad you named it because it feels good to name things.
Hmm.
I remember one time at an event that I went to, like pre-pandemic. It was a new event for me, so I didn't really know anybody, and it was a luncheon. So definitely had like flashbacks to middle school cafeteria situation and finding a table to sit at. And I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna name that I'm awkward and that this whole thing is awkward. So I sat down and I was like, hey, anyone else have social anxiety? Feel a little awkward about, figuring out which table to sit at. And like a bunch of people laughed and then it was fine. Like we then could get into conversation. So
Yeah.
I love that you did that. I think sometimes naming things um like shrink that, like the power that thing has in the moment.
Hmm.
So I'm excited you're here. I'm curious to learn more about how you got into writing. How is that something that became a passion of yours?
Wow. Okay. So when I first started being an entrepreneur, I had a massage therapy business. And like back then, I would have said like I was an introvert, so I didn't really want to like network.
Mm,
So I really like leaned on writing like blog posts and getting like my website found on Google. But right now, I mean, I guess in the last couple of months, like really like exploring my neurodivergence and being around other neurodivergent people. Um, Maybe communicating verbally with like not really clear expectations of like how the conversation
mm.
is going to go is maybe not like my strong suit, you know? So I think that's really why I am a writer because it really helps me ground myself in what I think before I'm getting like other people's opinions on it.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Yeah, I was writing the other day about um an aspect of my neurodivergence is I'm dyslexic. And like I was never tested in school or anything, but basically have all the all all the signs. Um, and it's just interesting because I have always turned to writing as an outlet. Like for me, mostly creative outlet through like poetry and some in the past spoken word. And so it's interesting, I think traditionally people think, oh, people with dyslexia like would not want anything to do with words. And yet words have been such yeah, an essential component of connecting with people, especially the written word. Like I know for me, and I'll be curious to hear from you too. Yeah, like I sometimes will much be more open to having like a real time typed out chat with someone versus a phone conversation,
Mhm.
just because there is like just a little bit more time to collect thoughts than like a long pause in a verbal conversation can
Yeah.
get uncomfortable for folks.
Yeah. I agree. That's definitely like whenever somebody says something to me, like often my brain goes in like so many different directions. So like that can be hard in a conversation, right? Unless you take like steps to like mitigate that, like maybe like when I'm working with my clients, like I'm often taking notes, like kind of like gathering what they're saying, so that I
Mhm.
can respond like appropriately in real time, to what they're saying and not like the thing that sometimes I skip ahead in a conversation, right? Because my brain is like already there. So like sometimes I have to like write like during a conversation to really ground myself into what the actual conversation is about.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I totally related to like brain going off in a million different directions when you said that. And my brain did that a little bit,
Yeah. It
which,
can be helpful and it can
yeah.
be unhelpful, right? Like, so it's great, like for my clients, because I'm coming up with all kinds of ideas for them to market their business.
Mm,
But, it can be hard on me because I have to make sure that I navigate that for myself.
yeah, absolutely. How did you like what piqued your curiosity in exploring your neurodivergence? Like you said, like this is a more recent thing for you.
Yeah, I'd say it's maybe in the last year or two. What piqued my curiosity is I got on Instagram to market my business, and then I started seeing all these posts about like different types of neurodivergence, and I related to like a lot of them. So I started going down that rabbit hole of like, oh, like maybe this is me, right? Instead of like I don't know. I feel like my life I've like pretended to be like a neurotypical person, and I didn't realize that I was pretending to be like great. Like I
Mm,
didn't know that all of that stuff was going on in the background.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's the demand, right? That we perform neurotypicality. And
Hmm.
for so many of us, like myself included, I'm kind of like 2 years into this awakened place journey. I don't know, whatever. It's whatever. I don't know what to call it right now.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's so much masking I was not aware of doing. Like there are things that I've been aware of, like, oh, I put on like my public persona and I have to be like on when I'm
Hmm.
in professional spaces or something, but I didn't fully understand what that meant for me until I began to allow myself to stop masking
Hmm.
and stop performing things
Yes.
that were not my natural state. Um, what like have you experienced this process of like beginning to unmask or shifting, like once you became aware of like, oh, I was trying to perform this, what has it been like to change course from that?
Yeah. So I'm also like late identified queer, and I feel like they kind of like mirror each other, and where there is like a sense of expansiveness, like I didn't know this stuff about myself, and like
Mm,
wow, like oh, like it's easier to be me at sometimes. And like grief, because
mm,
there's so much information that I didn't have about myself for so much of my life.
yeah.
And I forgot your question, so I hope I'm responding to it. But also like anger that this is the world that we have all co-created together, where so many of us are like don't even know who we are because we've just been trying to like cope with the world.
Yeah. I don't remember what my question was either, so we're good. It's one of those things I've learned to embrace about myself.
Yeah.
um I appreciate you bringing up the grief aspect. I think that's something that many of us experience and it is not talked about a lot. Um, do you would you be okay with exploring that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Um, So I'll start and then you can ask me questions.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize I was like queer until I was in my mid 20s, and that's a long time to live without knowing that about yourself. And then I didn't realize I was gender queer until 2020 when I had so much time to myself.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that I was neurodivergent. Well, I'm 40 now until like maybe 2 years ago. So it's just like I've lived my life and made all these choices and like how would it have been different if I had known this when I was like 6, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I resonate with that. I'm late bloomer and all the things, gender
Mm-hmm.
expansiveness, queer. Queer came along like late 30s. And I feel like gender expansiveness came kind of with my neurodivergent awakening. Like those were pretty similar. And yeah, like you said, like they're very parallel paths of kind of
Mm-hmm.
like becoming more and more expansive and casting off like the imposed identities that other people have kind of like bestowed upon me, upon us throughout life. Um, when I look back, like being raised in a very um, fundamental evangelical religious home, definitely played a huge part in that. And yeah, I resonate with those grief things that you mentioned around like what would it have been like to be like knowing that I'm queer as a kid? Like I don't know that it would have helped. I was already like an awkward, weird on the outside kid.
Yeah, it would have had to have been a different world, right? Because
Yeah.
like I was born in the 80s and I definitely remember like you did not want to be gay, right?
Yeah.
And like I was
Yeah.
already awkward and it was not it was not okay really, right? To be like that.
Yeah.
Um, so what if I knew this information and we lived in a different world? And I just like I'm exploring that in writing now, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know what else I want to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I have thought, whew, like maybe there are ways that my brain was protecting myself from knowing certain things about myself and uh, like until I could be at the place of my own healing and my own like journey that I could like receive the information about those parts of myself.
Yeah,
Like I came into these different aspects of my identity in celebration because of where I was in life versus being, in a place where maybe I would like if the world wasn't different
right.
and I came into my queerness growing up, like that that would have been an additional
Yeah,
like thread of complex trauma running through my life. So
yeah,
there's things
it,
that I'm like, I'm not grateful that this is how it went down. And also it's something I'm learning to accept.
yeah. I definitely see why I wasn't ready to know those things about myself, and that's why the laws in the US that are being passed around, what was it? Like they're taking like queer representation out of schools in Florida. And I think that's like it seems like maybe it seems like a small thing, but like when people don't know who they are and when like even like adults don't know
Mhm.
that there are queer people around them, I think that's a problem, right? So I think that's why it's really important to have queer representation in schools and in art and in TV and in books.
Yes, Absolutely.
And neurodivergent
Yeah.
representation too, right?
Yes. I I am so glad that you named that. Um, I mean, now as I'm in my mid 40s, and there are things that take me aback at like how deeply meaningful it is to see that, right? Like I recently saw this clip of um like two women who were doing a pairs figure skating routine, right? And like this is revolutionary, right? Like it's always been traditionally a man and a woman, and
Hmm.
they are opening up that um sport or the performance to welcome mixed gender couples. And I was so surprised by how deeply moving it was to see like that figure skating is not something I follow. It's like a deep passion of mine. But I was like, wow, it's kind of one of those things like I didn't know that I missed it until I experienced it. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I want more of this everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, or when there's a show that it's like, oh my gosh, there's like a queer love storyline and it's just like happy and good and like it yeah, it continues to surprise me how much joy and excitement I get in that. And so
Hmm.
even for adults, we need our own rep representation.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why I do the show is to create samples of representation, right? Like this is how I learned about myself is hearing the narratives of other late realized neurodivergent folks and especially folks who like are gender expansive and were socialized as girls because I think that has a lot to do with the level of masking and like not being identified as well as just kind of other things, right? Like I think about the majority of my the ways that I stim or fidget are internal and like nobody would know that I'm doing them because like being raised to be like be quiet, sit there and be cute and like don't draw attention to yourself, be like obedient and compliant, like those are the messages. And then
Yeah.
there's different messages for boys who are like, oh, boys will be boys. They get to be rowdy and rambunctious, and that's just how boys are.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it took me seeing other folks who had similar experiences of like how they were socialized and realizing, oh, yeah, that's a big part of why it took me 42 years to learn this about
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back to what you said, like that people wouldn't like see, like have evidence of it, right?
Mm,
Because like I have like this internal monologue going on like all the time, right? And like sometimes it's like ruminating and anxiety, and people are like, "Oh, you look so calm. I wouldn't know," right? So like it's like, yeah.
hmm. Yes. Yeah. And just learning about like um so I've become aware like I don't know, I'm like multiply neurodivergent. Several of the things that I have identified are autistic and ADHD. And I was always like, I'm not hyperactive. Like I'm a pretty low key, low
Mhm.
energy person. And somebody was like, but is your brain hyperactive? What? You just blew my whole mind right there. Like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
my brain is going all the time.
Yeah.
And there's specific things I have to do like at night to make it quiet so that I can sleep.
Yeah.
Do you experience that too?
Yeah. And I like I just didn't know that not everybody experienced that, right? Like I thought it was just like normal way to be, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like there are, what was I watching the other day? There was something I was watching and um somebody was talking about how like they don't talk in their head. Like there's no conversation or like they don't have out loud internal thoughts. And I've also learned that there are folks who like don't get mental imagery. Like they don't see pictures in their mind's eye. And
Hmm.
it's fascinating to me because, oh my God, like my whole world. My brain is nonstop making movies about every single thing like
Hmm.
that's happening. Sometimes that gets me in trouble because the little like cartoon movie my brain made of the conversation is more funny than the actual conversation. So I'm like giggling about the movie my brain just made, and then I'm like, oh wait, this is like a serious conversation. Like,
Yeah.
get your head out of your head. Um, but yeah, it's fascinating to me, right? Like the more we learn, like, oh, like, yeah, just there's so many ways the brain exists.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing to me. And I just think I go back to what you said about the representation. Like the more people are sharing and talking about it, the more we realize, or at least I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I don't feel like neurotypical is the neuro majority anymore. I don't. mm, I'm kind of suspect that neurotypicality exists.
I am too, right? Or at least like the standards, right? Like, I don't think they work for anybody, right? Like, I think even like if somebody is quote unquote neurotypical, they're probably still conforming to a standard of what they're supposed to be
Yes,
doing, right?
yes. Because seriously, and I know there's people who are like, oh, suddenly everybody's neurodivergent. No, we've been this. It's just that we now have some language for it, and we are sharing our stories and find like, oh, me too.
Yeah, and I think like, like part of that is like, right, like the ableist culture, right, that we live in, where like it's not like, oh, we'll just like, accommodate you. It's like you have to prove that you can't do
Mm,
this and that you're not being lazy and you just have to try harder and you have to be the one that asks for accommodations.
mm,
So I don't I don't know. That's definitely a cultural shift that I and hoping that will happen in my lifetime, but um yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's a lot. Like I have been deeply humbled to see all the ways that I carried like internalized ableism as I'm unpacking my identity, as I'm learning to accommodate myself and express those accommodations to others. Um, and yeah, like what you said about there has to be this proof, right? I see so many like I follow a number of wheelchair users on Instagram and they're constantly talking about like, yes, sometimes I walk, like I do have use of my legs. And people are constantly like, oh, you should park in in the accessible
Hmm.
parking and you shouldn't get to have these privileges. And it's like, why why is their energy being wasted like monitoring people?
Yeah.
And this idea of like accommodations are unfair to like they're seen as this unfair advantage that
Hmm.
other people are deprived of when it's like the accommodation is like filling the gap that was there. So like
Hmm.
it's not putting someone ahead of you.
Yeah.
It's making the playing field a little bit more level.
And it just makes me wonder like how many people like go towards like entrepreneurship because like they couldn't get the accommodations that they needed in their workplace. And then like I know like my experience is like still holding those standards to myself and being like a really crappy boss. So like I don't know, like really recently, I mean like in the last 6 months or so, getting real about like what my capacity is and like how
Mm.
I show up to work best. And I don't know, that's a struggle I have as an entrepreneur. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh my goodness. Yes. I actually just put up a poll on LinkedIn and on my Facebook this week, asking people like if if you're an entrepreneur, what were the key factors in like driving you to entrepreneurship? And so I had four options. Number one was like burnout, job trauma. Number two was disability, accessibility needs. Three was just like serial entrepreneur. And four was workplace discrimination. And haven't checked in on the LinkedIn poll, but on Facebook, there's probably over 25 people who responded. And number one, job trauma was uh, absolutely the majority, like almost everybody had number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then number two was the close second, the lack of accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not surprised by the responses of this poll. It just kind of confirmed what I have been seeing and reading everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the challenge, right? It's part of um, what I experienced as a neurodivergent entrepreneur of like, okay, yeah, I don't fit here because it's not accessible and I'm not going to thrive and survive. And so let me turn to entrepreneurship. Then also the challenge of like launching a business is not neurodivergent friendly in like at least in this socioeconomic climate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It requires a great deal of like hustle and grind. And I was talking to somebody recently and they were like, well, like, how come you didn't just like continue the work that you were doing, like continue seeing clients as a therapist, like gradually taper that down while you gradually built up your business. And the farther I get away from it, it's hard to remember, but in that moment at that time, I had zero capacity to add anything
Mm-hmm.
on top of the work that I was doing. Like I was so burnt out by like I had my own business as a private practice, but I was burnt out by the like just the demands of running a private practice and like the demands of um I don't know, all the things. And I just like at that time I was like I had no creativity to even like conceptualize what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I had no bandwidth to add anything else. Um and so I just had to stop, which financially was not the most wise decision to like stop my income and then try to launch
Right.
a business. Don't exactly recommend it.
Yeah.
And also, I recognize there are so many folks who I think, especially for neurodivergent folks, because we are conditioned to just kind of bear the brunt of suffering through what doesn't work for us. When we get to the point of burnout and like, I can't go anymore, like, we are all the way out. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
past running on fumes, we're past rolling down the hill, counting on gravity, like, done.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it absolutely presents a challenge. I'm curious for you, like, what was your transition like from, or yeah, like from workplace to entrepreneur, like to your own business?
Yeah. So like with my first business, I had a full-time job and I was like running on fumes, as you say, right? And like I have a high pain tolerance, so I was able to keep that going while I built up my private massage practice. But with this business, my plan before the pandemic was to
Mm,
decrease the demands of my massage business by moving my practice into my house so that I didn't need to work as much to pay like the bills.
mm,
Um, but then a pandemic happened, and I didn't have a business anymore. So it's been a challenge, and like I've had to ask for a lot more help than I'm like used to asking for, and I've had to be okay with like maybe maybe I don't have the capacity to do, to build like this vision or as quickly as seen on
mm,
Instagram, right? Like six figures and however quickly you can make it, right? So just and also like I sometimes take over responsibility for things. So just coming to terms with the fact that like this isn't all on me, right? Like our
mm,
society is structured so that most people don't have access to the support that they need. So just like really being real about what my capacity is and kind of, I just read Rest is Resistance by Trisha
mm.
Hersey of the Net Ministry, and she said that she just got to a point where she was going to rest and let the chips fall where they may. So I feel like I'm in that place, and like I don't know, like I feel really grounded in saying that. Like that's kind of
Mhm.
like when I hear myself say it, it's kind of a scary thing, but I feel really grounded in saying that. And
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of my anxiety for my whole life has been like trying to pretend that the world isn't structured the way it is and like I could take care of myself and do all the things necessary to do that. But
Mm.
just kind of releasing that has been really grounding for me,
Really
even though
powerful.
it's still a little scary, right?
Yes. Yes. Man. And that resonates because I like I'm probably in one of the most financially stressful periods of time in my life. And also I feel so energized and excited about what I'm building in my business. And like
Mm-hmm.
internally, I'm like, yeah, it's going to take the time that it takes. I only have like the panic and anxiety when like society comes knocking and it's like, hey, you have bills due. You have this,
Yeah.
that. I just want to go, hold on, I'm building something.
Yeah,
Everybody's
bills
gonna,
too.
everyone's gonna get their share. Just like, hang on, you're fine.
Yeah.
Big businesses that don't actually need my money. But yeah, I appreciate you speaking about rest is resistance. It's definitely on my Audible list.
Yeah.
Um, I'm also curious about what has helped you feel supported as a neurodivergent entrepreneur.
Um, just like acknowledging the reality of things is really helpful for me. I'm sure it's not for everybody, but just really acknowledging like the reality of like what resources I have access to, what resources I don't, what my capacity is. It's just really grounding. Because I think like I said this already, but like I spent like my whole life trying to pretend that it wasn't and trying to like scramble, and that's not really
Mhm.
supportive. So just like being real about like reality, right, has been really
Yeah,
supportive for
yeah,
me.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Um, like same too. Like I think there's a lot of really like nasty kind of bullying messaging around entrepreneurship, I think in the mainstream world. Like, if you're not going hard 5,000% of the time, you're not really committed. You don't really want this. I'm like, no, that's that's not okay. And I
Yeah.
think one of the reasons why these conversations have been important to me and holding space for talking about what it's like to be neurodivergent in business is is to normalize that that's not normal. Like,
Mhm.
so many neurodivergent business owners that I talk to kind of before they found the community of other neurodivergent business owners were feeling like, oh, I'm a failure because like I have to stop and rest or like my body can't go hard. I'll, stay up all night like I did when I was in college and pull these all-nighters and get stuff done.
Mhm.
And so yeah, there's this element that like neurodivergent business is slow. We go slow and steady,
Mhm.
and it doesn't mean we're not committed, doesn't mean we're not passionate. It just means we are making room for our our brains and our bodies to have needs. And like you said, like society is not supportive of that. It's not accommodating in that way. And so if we're not sharing these stories and we're left to society's feedback, we can feel like, oh, we're failures. I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just figure out a way to go back into the workforce. And like we have panic attacks about that. I mean, some of
Mhm.
us have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, as we think about wrapping up our conversation, do you have any particular like messages that you would want to share with someone else who's being curious, exploring their neurodivergence, um, and and entrepreneurship, either any one of those things or something entirely different?
Yeah, I mean, like one, like it's not easy and like we won't always get it right, but like trying to be kind to yourself. Um, and then I know like a lot of neurodivergent entrepreneurs I've noticed have trouble like talking about and writing about the work that they do. Or they think that they do. And I would encourage them that they're probably a better writer or a better like speaker about their work than if they think they are, and to like just keep at it, even though like it's hard and you feel like you're like word vomiting to people. And if you're able to write, like even if it's just for yourself, to like really like ground yourself in the work that you do.
Yeah, I love that. And so in copywriting, I think you help folks in a couple different ways. You Can you tell us about that? I think you do some done for you services and some done with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I used to do done for you services, but I realized that that didn't work for my brain and my capacity. So I do done with you services, where there's one where we hop on Zoom like this and you like tell me all the word vomit and we start like working in Google Docs together to get your words onto paper.
Mhm.
And there is one that I call copywriter in your pocket that I've been like trying to figure out a way that it can be supportive of me as well as my clients. And I think I've landed on a way, but it's where folks can submit their writing and get copy critiques on it. So
Ooh,
that is coming soon. It might be out
that's
by the
exciting.
time this video airs, but it's more like of a collaborative process.
I like that. And what would you want to tell folks who are like, ooh, I don't like marketing myself feels gross and I don't like that so much of marketing is like manipulative and
Yeah.
slimy. What would you tell folks who are struggling with that?
Well, I would say that it feels gross because probably a lot of the ways that you've been taught to do it are gross, and that there are ways that you can do it that feel supportive to you and to your clients. I like to think of it more conversational. I feel like a lot of the marketing is like kind of like coming from like the person selling the services like up here, and like their client is down here and they gotta like lift them up. But I think it can be a more collaborative process than that.
I love that. I love that so much. And that's one of the things like because we met through a copywriting space. And I mean, it was revolutionary to learn that there are different ways of like, there are different ways that are not oppressive, that are like consent based and ethical. Um,
And they
to,
still work.
right, right. Um, so I think that's another piece because I think for, I know this isn't true for everyone, but a lot of neurodivergent folks have a powerful sense of like justice and ethics and values. And I think that can be part of like launching a business, like talking about themselves and like getting people to
Mhm.
buy your thing. without knowing that there are ways to do that in alignment with values and justice and,
Mhm.
the things that are important to them. So I am grateful that you are here in the world doing what you do and being who you are. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you online?
Yeah, my website, KarynClaflin.com. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn at Karyn Claflin. Not always like consistent posting, but if you DM me there, probably the most consistent way if you want to hear from me regularly is to sign up for my newsletter. And I'm sure that the links will be somewhere around this video here.
Yes, absolutely. The links will be in the caption. And what is the name of your newsletter? You have an interesting name for your
So I
newsletter.
call it the Rooftop Weekly.
I love that. I love that. So thank you, Karyn, for being in this conversation with me and for sharing parts of your story with me and others in our community.
Thanks, Jen. I love these. I I was a little nervous that about like unscripted, like not having any idea what we are going to talk about, but I'm surprised by where our conversation went, and I really love how it went.
Yay! I'm so glad. That's wonderful. I mean, that's the most important thing. So stay tuned, folks, for another episode when it drops. I'm not promising you when, but it will drop. Bye bye.